And then don't they also have another like?
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Call to order the June meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Want to recognize we have student representative Emily Gresbrink from the Twin Cities campus joining us on Zoom, as well as Regent Tao Urabe, who changed her avatar. I really like that avatar you had on. It was really cool, but we're glad you could join us. With that, we'll turn to the agenda. The June meeting is affectionately referred to as
Emily, can you hear
the
me?
Galswick Show, as the chief auditor
Can you
fills
hear the
out
room?
agenda with some really important
Okay, it looks like the
updates.
meeting
And with that, I will
started, but
turn
we
it over
can't
to
hear
you.
the room.
Thank you, Chair Kenyang and members of the committee. So the first agenda item that
I'll
we
text
have
Rachel.
is the
Okay,
audit
sounds
update.
good.
This is the update that we provide to the committee
Oh,
3
okay,
times
thank
a
you,
year,
Rachel.
laying out the work that we've done during this previous 4 months. So if you turn your attention to page 6 of your document material, that is our follow-up results. We had an implementation rate this period of 35%. So this is slightly below our goal rate of 40%. It is a significant improvement from our follow-up last period, though, of 18%, but it's still below that overall goal. The other area I'd highlight, a third of these are outstanding items that are receiving first-time follow-up.
I didn't hear anything.
There we go. Did we get the audio?
Yes, it's
All right. So a third of the outstanding items are receiving their first-time follow-up, and 40% of the outstanding items are currently considered past due. If you didn't hear me before, I was talking about page 6 of the document material, the follow-up results. So overall, I'm not concerned with these these follow-up results, given the complexity of some of these issues that are outstanding, given some staffing constraints, et cetera. But there was only one period this last year in which we actually hit the goal rate. It's something we've talked about before at this committee and in other conversations is, are we using the right metrics to track follow-up? And so that's something over the next year I think we'll have some conversations about. And is there better metrics that we should be considering to make sure that we're incentivizing the right type of implementations and the right type of work, and providing the committee some insight into how that work is going. On page 7, we have our items that are over 2 years, essential items. So as a reminder to the committee, once they hit the 2-year mark, we provide a little bit of additional information on why are these items still outstanding, some of the work that they're doing. So these 2 items are not new. You've seen them before. The first one is related to the UMD School of Fine Arts, and specifically the Tweed Museum. We have an outstanding issue at the Tweed Museum related to inventories. Making sure that we have a good handle on what are the items that we have within the collection, and making sure that we're complying with any regulations associated with those, including potentially NAGPRA, et cetera. I'm happy to report on that they've established a plan to really conduct this inventory, and funds have been allocated in order to be able to get that done. So hoping to be able to report back at the next update some good progress on that and moving that towards full remediation. The other item is related to University Health and Safety and their ongoing efforts to consolidate the safety training throughout the institution and provide oversight mechanisms to really make sure that all the various safety trainings that wherever they're happening are getting done as needed. We had one audit that completed all of their remaining essential items, the telehealth audit. We always like to give them a shout out. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes on behind the scenes in order to implement these controls, so always want to make sure that we give them kudos. On page 8 of your materials, we have the completion of recommendations for audit report fiscal year. So this is a schedule that I provided for the first time at the the June 2022 meeting. So it's just something I'm providing annually. And where I want you to focus on this particular schedule is really the number of items that have taken 2 years to remediate. And so if you take a look at this, you'll see that the audit reports that we issued in FY19 and FY20, we had an increasing number that had very extended timelines for remediation. And I think that coincides with the start of the pandemic and then the subsequent staffing constraints, et cetera. So you'll also see for the FY21, we currently don't have any that are hitting that 2-year mark. So I'm hoping that that is a sign that some of those pressures are easing and some of these very extended timelines will continue to be reduced. If you go all the way down to page 19 of your document materials, this is our audit activity report. We completed 8 audits in the last 4 months and 1 SNAP review related to unreconciled stale checks. For our 8 audit reports, 4 were rated as good, 3 as adequate, and 1 as needs improvement. The audit report that we rated as needs improvement related to the I-9 temporary process. So a little bit of background on this. Whenever an employee starts at the university, they need to go through the I-9 process to confirm eligibility to work. During the pandemic, the federal government provided some flexibility on how that can be handled, including allowing you to use expired documentation, conduct the reviews remotely, et cetera. However, once we transition back to in-person work, you're supposed to get the updated documents and look at those in person. Overall, we found that the guidance on the front end was good from OHR and to the community that needs to do these reviews, but we had concerns about the monitoring and ensuring that was actually happening when people came back. At the start of our review, 3% of the individuals who started during the pandemic had not had that documentation reviewed yet. OHR is aware of this and they're working through it, and I'm expecting that we'll be able to say that these areas are remediated at our next follow-up. For the 3 audits that were rated as adequate, the first was Bell Museum. So Bell Museum, they have a beautiful building. You should go visit if you haven't been there. Opened in 2019 over on the St. Paul campus. They have over 1 million specimens, very scientific specimens, art collection, et cetera. They have weathered some significant headwinds related to the pandemic and subsequent financial issues and staffing constraints, just like a lot of other units. We overall found that their environment was adequate, but similar theme on inventories. Again, this was a place where we felt that they need some additional work to ensure that they're maintaining and tracking their inventory. Also saw some issues related to information systems and some other financial processes. Hormel Institute was another one that we rated as adequate. There's a relatively new team down at the Hormel Institute, and they've been working hard to establish strong control processes, improve culture, et cetera. However, though we found that the environment was generally adequate, especially in the payroll area. We have found a number of issues, and we think some additional oversight and control processes are necessary. The third audit that was rated as adequate is the UMD Dining Services. They ultimately have a number of control processes in place, but they were relatively informal. And so really what we think is that there's some additional need for formalization. The area that will be most challenging, I believe, for UMD Dining Services is the information technology space, where they don't have a dedicated IT director or a consolidated IT group, and that's going to make it a little bit more challenging as they become increasingly reliant on those information technology systems. Then we had 4 audits that were rated as good: microbiology and immunology, civil, environmental, and geoengineering, Institute on the Environment, or also known as IONE, and then the transition review for the University Relations and Youth Services Vice President. On page 30 of your document materials, last item I'll highlight here, we have the remediation plans that are referencing peak. So again, this is a new schedule that was created this fiscal year. As we go out and do our internal audit work, we're seeing an increasing number of units that are referencing out to the peak initiative, saying instead of trying to create a new control process to fix this here, we would like to just fold it into the larger peak effort and establish the process as part of that. I think that makes good sense. I think it's a good way of approaching it. But we want to make sure that those items are not getting lost and that people are keeping track of them. And so we have shared this schedule with members of the senior leadership team and with management at large so that we can continue to track those. And that, Chair Kenyanya, ends my remarks on the first agenda item.
Thank you for the internal audit update. Any questions from the committee? Seeing no questions, we can turn to the FY24 internal audit plan.
Perfect. Excuse me. All right, so the previous item was a discussion of the work that we've done for the last 4 months. This is taking a step back, a little bit broader lens. This is the work that we conducted in fiscal year 2023 and the work that we plan to conduct in fiscal year 2024. So this is our annual report. In this presentation, I will walk through our FY 2023 results. I'll talk about the risk assessment and audit plan development process that we go through before then introducing and walking you through our FY 2024 plan, including tying it out to some of the key institutional risks that we think about when we're developing this plan. I'll talk briefly about our coordination with ERM and PEAK. It's a theme that we talk about frequently, I think, here at the Audit and Compliance Committee, but I think it bears repeating. And then the last item is just some other communications, some of which I'm required to provide by Institute of Internal Audit Standards. For 2023 results, we completed 24 audits in 2023. 84% of these had satisfactory results. Only 16% were rated as needs improvement. I think that this again continues to demonstrate that we have an overall culture of compliance and risk management throughout the institution. But there's always work to be done, and continued improvement will always be a goal for the institution. Other thing that I think is important to know is we have four additional audits that are in progress that we plan to have issued by the end of the fiscal year. If you look at Appendix B, I can't remember what page that is, maybe 46, something like that. But Appendix B in your docket materials, we have it detailed out all of the audits that we completed in FY 2023 and the status of all the items on the audit plan. We also have 5 audits that we have initiated in FY 2023 here, but we expect that we'll be issuing those in FY 24. In addition to this work, we also completed 7 investigations and 3 SNAP reviews. Especially for those of you who are new to the committee, as a reminder, when we talk about SNAP reviews, these are targeted reviews that we perform, often highly leveraging data analytics, pulling just background information to be able to provide to the administration a little bit of insight about a particular risk or a particular area of interest. So in my previous remarks, I mentioned unreconciled checks as an example of one of these types of SNAP reviews. So for developing the FY24 plan, we think about the development of this in 4 major buckets. First, we start with the information gathering portion of this, where we look to gather key unit data. And much of this is done on using various SQL queries, et cetera, to pull data from the university's key systems, such as PeopleSoft, so that we can use that information to do our quantitative analysis side of our risk assessment. We also look at the number of years it's been since we've had audit coverage in various areas to make sure that we are, especially in the high-risk areas, that we're coming through and getting coverage on those audit areas. We then take that quantitative information and we couple it with our qualitative information through a broader risk analysis process that includes interviews that we do extensively throughout the university. If I have my numbers right, I believe we had 120 interviews. We interviewed 120 different people for this audit plan across 57 different units around the institution. So really a broad view. In addition to that university view, we supplement that with reviews of recent publications and university top risks. We survey other large research universities, including all of our Big Ten peers, to see where are their areas of interest, concern, places maybe where they've seen some significant findings in the last year. And we review the federal agency's audit priorities and look through their recently issued reports. Once we do that, we develop our audit plan. Once we gather all that information, we develop our audit plan, where we look to make sure that audit plan has proper coverage of all the various institutional risks, especially the key risks that have been identified by the regents and the administration, currently codified in the institutional risk profile. And we look to make sure that our audit plan ties out to strategic goals, but especially Impact 2025. We then meet with key personnel to make sure that we hit all the right notes within our audit plan, including the president, and now I'm here meeting with you. So for allocation of resources, when we think about how are we going to get audit coverage throughout the institution, and it might be important to note that we get more requests to have audits done than we really do have audit resources to complete them. So maybe that's a good thing that people want to see their auditor, but it is a continuing challenge for us. So last year we were able to spend 60% of our time on scheduled audits that we were planning on doing. We're budgeting next year for a similar amount of time, 58%. For investigations, we like to hold a 7% for investigations. We only had 1% again this year, which is good, and that enables us to get some additional work done. However, there are times in which we may have major investigations, et cetera, and we need to make sure that we're holding sufficient resources. Yes, go
Chief
ahead.
Auditor, is an investigation the same as a SNAP review, a SNAP audit?
No, it isn't. It's a good clarification. So the SNAP review would really fall into the administrative requests or special requests bucket. Investigations are situations in which either through the university's hotline, the U-Report hotline, or by units contacting us directly who maybe they're aware of us or are familiar with internal audit, where they are identifying some potential financial operational misconduct. So this is special work that we do to confirm whether or not that actually happened, and as well as time that we will potentially spend partnering with other agencies, units within the university and outside the university, whether that be law enforcement or others.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Chair Gay?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Again, I mentioned already for the special projects, that includes our SNAP reviews. It also includes any particular requests that we may receive from the administration or from the board throughout the year. Example of this would be the vaccine verification work that we did in FY 2022, where we're asked to go and confirm that students who had reported that they were vaccinated, that they actually were, that we could get that evidence. Other examples is we work with the bookstore to look at their inventory processes as they're doing those inventories to provide an additional double check type thing. We dedicate 7% of our time to follow-up. So as I mentioned in the previous report, as you saw that all those follow-up results, that's to go back and work with units on outstanding essential items to ensure ongoing remediation. And then finally for our administration. So obviously the 25% was much higher than what we were expecting in FY23, and we're budgeting for that to come back down in FY24. To give you some understanding of why I think that number jumped in FY23, we had a significant amount of turnover, as many of you may recall, within the internal audit department. In an average year, we have about one person who will leave the internal audit department. In the last 18 months, we had 5 that left that then required significant amount of time to recruit and onboard, as well as the remaining administrative work that includes, by the way, some internal process improvements, data analytics type work that we do. That ends up then getting spread, though, across fewer individuals when we have that sort of turnover and absence. So I'm hopeful that this next year, as we've been able to successfully hire everyone back onto our team, excluding two roles that we're currently actively recruiting for, that number will come back down. I think it'll be especially helpful that our entire leadership team is now established with the hiring of our IT audit director in September, while for the first 6 months, or first 3 months, I should say, of the fiscal year, we were handling that role through an interim position. So using one of our other auditors to handle that. So for deploying our resources, for figuring out how we should actually use these resources, we begin by thinking about our high risk, again, the high risk activities, but we also want to make sure that we're getting broad organizational coverage. So we think about the major organizational components, and we confirm that we're at least getting some audit work done in all those various areas to make sure that we don't have areas that go a few years without being looked at. As I previously mentioned, we make sure we tie out to the institutional risk profile and key risk mitigation plans. And we think about the areas of strategic priority, especially Impact 2025. We also put a lot of effort into ensuring that we hit as many of the board and management requests as possible. But again, we normally have more requests than we have resources. So from all of this work that we do, pulling together the audit plan and thinking about the institutional risks, we put all that information into what we call our audit universe. So we roll up all of the various activities that happen within the university into 175 auditable units. That number varies a little bit from year to year, but currently at 175. We have it set up purposefully to be diamond-shaped or more of a bell curve, where we have 24 that are high risk and 41 that are considered low risk, with 110 that are in that moderate risk area. As you can imagine, we spend more of our audit resources on the high-risk items and making sure that we're getting coverage on the moderate risk. But we will occasionally do some audit work within the low-risk areas because we think that is important that every unit knows that they may get audited, as well as sometimes we identify things that we weren't aware of would be as high of risk. Example of that was, as I was mentioning earlier, about the Tweed Museum. That came out of the UMD School of Fine Arts audit that we originally believed to be a low-risk area. And then as we started digging into the Tweed Museum processes, we saw some additional risks that needed to be addressed. In this particular audit plan, and I'll get into this detail a little bit later, everything is within the high or moderate risk except for one audit, which is the UMD Registrar Office, which is a low-risk audit. But it's something that we hadn't looked at since I think it was 1996 was the last time that we were in that specific area, so we thought that it was a good time to do that. So from our audit planning, some key themes that were identified. The first one is probably no surprise to everybody in this room, healthcare partnerships, with the questions surrounding the Fairview-Sanford potential merger and how that may impact our academic health center. The enrollment in finances, excuse me, especially at the system campuses, continues to be an area of interest and concern that is on the minds of a number of the senior leaders in Regents. Staffing is a risk that we did have on the audit plan from last year. However, the nature of the staffing question has changed a little bit given the leadership turnover, especially with President Gable's departure. But also we just have a number of deans who have recently left the institution. And with that, you just have a loss of institutional knowledge, again, as well as significant effort administratively to bring in those new deans, as Provost Croson can attest to. We also continue to look to hire, not just in the dean areas, but throughout the institution. And as everyone likely knows, the job market still remains very tight, and it is difficult to recruit. And we're looking to continue to refine the processes with the return to work, actually coming back on campus, et cetera. The next three items are items that I think may be on our audit plan indefinitely, areas of interest and concern for the institution. Information security and data management. Everyone, I believe, is probably aware of the amount of risks that are out there related to cybersecurity, ransomware, et cetera. Couple that with the increasing level of regulation associated with handling of research data and with particular types of other confidential data. And this is just, I think, will always be an area of high risk and interest for us, or at least for the years ahead. Campus safety, we spent a lot of time at the board meetings, I think, discussing campus safety, so I wouldn't expect this to be a surprise to the committee, but again, continues to be an area of interest. Similarly, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, making sure that people feel welcome here. And that we're providing the proper resources to ensure that we're reflecting the values and the population of our state. Finally, inflation impacts. This was a new one that we added last year. I am hopeful, although I look to Provost Croson to tell me otherwise, but hopeful that these pressures are beginning to ease and that we're seeing some of those cost increases at least slowing down. So we're hopeful that will happen. But as for now, it does make it difficult for budgeting, planning, resource allocation when you have this variable of you don't know what the costs are going to be on the other end, from buildings to hiring people. Okay, so with all this, we put together our annual audit plan. So we put the audit plan together in two basic groupings. Unit audits and process audits. I always think of unit audits as verticals, where we think about a particular college or a unit and we say, College of Education and Human Development. What are all the major processes that they have in place, centers, things that they're doing, research, et cetera? What are the areas of highest risk and what are they doing to manage those risks? And are they managing those effectively? Versus process audits, where we're thinking about it as a horizontal, where we say, how is the institution doing on managing HIPAA compliance with healthcare information, no matter where that healthcare data may live? So again, more of a horizontal versus a vertical. Our counts that I was talking about before of the 175 units, that really ties to our unit risks, our unit audits. In addition to this vertical and horizontal thinking, we also break the audit plan into 2 tiers. The tier 1 audits are bolded. These are going to be our highest priority audits for the next fiscal year, while the tier 2 audits are not in bold. These are ones that we would potentially swap out if there were new risks that were identified, if their higher priorities were to come up, or if we were to have significant staffing constraints beyond what we budgeted for. As always, and as you may recall at the February Audit Committee, we communicate when we make those sorts of changes to the audit plan, to the Audit and Compliance Committee, and I would do that if we were ever to move or change any of those tier 2 audits. I'll talk a little bit more about some of these specific audits in the slides ahead when we talk about how they tie to the institutional risk profile. But first, the institutional risk profile. So as you may recall from the May Audit and Compliance Committee, there's currently a major effort underway to establish the Enterprise Risk Management Program, and as part of that, we're looking to get an updated institutional risk profile to the Audit Committee at the September Audit Committee meeting is the goal. When that happens, we'll look to tie our audit work out to that new institutional risk profile, but as of now, we're still working with our 2018 institutional risk profile. So when we're thinking about our audit plan, we think about how does it tie out to those various risks that were identified in 2018. If you look at the farthest left column, the X's highlighted in maroon are places where we believe that we at least have some coverage of those particular institutional risks embedded into our audit plan or the audit work in which we're planning on doing in the next year. So to talk through a little bit about how we're tying these audits out to the various institutional risks, the first one of clinical partnerships, there are clinical partnerships that the College of Pharmacy has with their residency programs throughout the state. So there is some coverage of that. Obviously, the partnership of most interest right now, our partnership with Fairview, it's still a moving target. So we have nothing currently on the audit plan that will address the specific risks related to that. But as the future of the Academic Health Center and our relationship with Fairview is defined over the next year, we would expect that we would come in and take a look at any risks that we see with that and to provide some independent assurance on those. For collaboration with externalities and joint ventures, we have effort certification or the effort management process. Just to give you a little bit of background on what effort management is, whenever we receive money for sponsored projects in order to do research, there's an expectation that those who are receiving money from those funds are actually working on those sponsored projects. And so we have mechanisms in place at the institution that are both required by our policies, but also by federal regulations to ensure that we are tracking how individuals are spending their time related to those sponsored projects. So this is a major effort that our faculty have to go through, our faculty and their staff has to go through to track this. So we're going to be looking at that process. From decentralization, there's a number of process audits that you'll see here that really, again, thinking about it from the horizontal lens, where I already mentioned HIPAA governance and oversight, but that would be an example of anywhere where we're using PHI or protected health information. How are we managing those? The University Foundation gift testing. This is an area where our memorandum of understanding with the foundation requires that the internal audit department provide some assurance that the funds that we're pulling from the foundation are being used in alignment with donor intent. We do this every year, but again, gives us some perspective on where that is happening anywhere within the institution. Demographics and succession planning, we have our transition reviews that we conduct at the end, that we conduct whenever one of our senior leaders leave the institution. We are expecting several of those in the next fiscal year with the number of deans who are departing, as well as we're currently working through both the president's transition review as well as the transition for the former dean of global programs. From facilities and maintenance, we have the parking and transportation, which has a major facilities footprint around the campus, and some challenges related to the revenue, as you can imagine, again, as we've moved more into a hybrid work environment. We also have UMD facilities management, which directly hits this. I won't go through all of the items in the information technology area, but again, looking at some coverage or trying to provide some coverage on our cybersecurity risks. So how are we doing on managing firewalls throughout the institution, our implementation of our central cloud platform, et cetera. Intercollegiate athletics, as a reminder to the committee, we conduct an audit in Twin Cities athletics every year. So we select a sport or a grouping of sports and provide some assurance that we're complying with all NCAA rules. We are also currently conducting our FY23 audit of UMD athletics. Legal and regulatory compliance, most of these I've touched on. I'll say the reason why parking and transportation, this shows up here, is they handle a tremendous number of credit card transactions. And so we think about this in terms of the payment card industry requirements. Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, this is a regulation that is primarily focused on the banking industry, but it impacts the university when it comes to financial aid. And there's just been a number of changes to this regulation that have been both proposed and implemented here over the last year or so. We originally had this on the FY23 plan, but this is a place where, because the rollout of the regulations were delayed, we decided to delay this audit, and we swapped in other audit work. Again, public funding reliability, the University Foundation gift testing, as well as our audits of the various units and colleges, our shifting enrollment patterns. I mentioned UMD Registrar earlier as a particular area of coverage of that, but again, we look at this whenever we're looking at our various college audits. High-risk research. We have the Masonic Cancer Center, which is a very large research, or has a very large research footprint, as well as the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute. So this is the university's supercomputer. Again, that supercomputer was another one where we delayed it, in part because they've been working to try to implement some new controls and processes to be HIPAA compliant. We wanted to wait to do that review until after that was done. The last item I want to highlight here is related to the last three items, the Student Affairs Care Team. So within the Vice President of Student Affairs area, this group is responsible for helping students connect with various mental health resources that they might need or other resources to support them. But in addition to that, it also oversees a group that's goal is to provide support to faculty, students, or staff who are concerned that there is a student that may be a harm to themselves or to others, and to ensure that those individuals are getting connected to the right resources. So we want to take a look at these processes and see that we're providing the adequate resources to support our faculty, staff, and students who may have these concerns, especially given some high-profile news cases that have happened, unfortunately, at some of our peer institutions. Going back to our coverage of major components, as I was saying before, we tried to make sure that we get coverage throughout the institution. This is a visual depiction of the primary area in which each of our audits within the audit plan roll up to. I will say, though, simply because you see finance as 4%, that doesn't mean they're only getting 4% coverage. As you can imagine, as we do our various college audits, for example, that would roll up to the provost, we always do a number of financial audit work steps. And so there is coverage of various areas within the other audits, but this gives you an idea of their major groupings. So with that, it's my professional opinion that the FY 2024 audit plan provides reasonable audit coverage across all major components of the institution. It addresses risks currently impacting the university and addresses risks areas identified by the Board of Regents as most important. So briefly on ERM and PEAK, before I turn it over to questions, I just want to continue to highlight that I personally am working with the ERM task force and sit on the PEAK steering committee to make sure that we stay abreast of what is happening in these areas that I believe will have short-term and long-term impacts on how internal audit conducts our work. In the short term, thinking about ERM, that institutional risk profile, and making sure that we stay in alignment. In the long run, thinking about the risks that ERM is seeing, the various key risk treatment plans that they're relying on to address those risks, and thinking about us coming in and being able to provide some audit coverage to say, yes, are those risk treatment plans really operating effectively? Again, we also will continue to monitor and report on how peak impacts how audit work is conducted. In the long run, this could impact when we're talking about the unit versus process audits, we may see an increasing number of process audits with time as more and more of that work is being done by operational centers, et cetera, throughout the institutions that are being handled within the individual units. So that's something that could really change how we do our audit work and frankly give us better audit coverage. In the short term, monitoring to make sure that we are tracking whenever there are places within the management action plan that they're referencing peak. So finally, a couple of items I want to communicate. First bullet being the most important. There were no impairments to independence in fiscal year 2023. This is something I'm required to report out to the audit committee every year, that if there was any undue influence by management or any restriction of scope, et cetera, to make sure that the audit committee is aware of that. And I'm happy to report that did not happen. We continue to receive prompt and adequate responses from the administration and continue to receive their support. So I'm very happy to report that. And lastly, but not least, I just want to remind the audit committee that you are served by a highly professional staff. We have a great team that I get to sit and represent in front of you today of individuals that all three of them are currently credentialed or have advanced degrees, and two of those are currently working on their credentials. And we have within our leadership team decades of experience of internal audit work. Some folks who have had decades here at the University of Minnesota. So the university is well served by this team. The last item is we again have the two open positions, but this is a big improvement for us from last year, and it feels like a win, even though it's always a challenge to bring new people on. So with that, Chair Kenyanya, I'll stand for any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Chief Auditor. Any questions from the committee? Regent Verhalen.
I just have one. Thank you, Chair Kenyanya, and thank you so much, Chief Auditor Galswick. It is very clear that, to this last slide's point, your team is highly dedicated to what they do. And one item to kind of tee off where you ended here with the two open positions, and we've talked about this before, having so much turnover, what do you see as some of the key challenges in your department and continuing to work within such a highly complex and specialized institution like the University of Minnesota as you bring in new individuals, but also really informing that culture to continue to stay highly motivated and really highly engaged in each of the aspects that the auditing team is undertaking?
Yeah.
Chief Auditor.
Yeah. Thank you, Regent Verhalen, Chair Kenyanya. It is a challenge. The University of Minnesota is an incredibly complex organization, and we really do rely on having a team that has deep institutional knowledge to be able to assess risk, but also to be able to help units connect dots and know where those various resources are, various policy requirements may be, et cetera. And with the significant amount of turnover, that there comes a challenge of trying to bring our new folks up to speed. Fortunately, within our leadership team, again, we do have the one new audit director, but the rest of the leadership team has been here for many years. Truthfully, two of our members have been here for over 20 years. And I've been here since 2007. So we do have this institutional knowledge that we're able to draw on, and we're trying to build that within our team. The other thing that I think that is a challenge, and it bears repeating, though we maybe have talked about it before, is there is negative unemployment for auditors, and there pretty much has always been, and it's just gotten worse over the years. I think Chair Kenyanya can probably speak to this as well from his day job. It's difficult to find IT security professionals, accountants, financial experts in general, and then especially as we think about it in terms of audit. The other thing that is difficult is traditionally how we have been able to staff our department is we bring people in at lower levels and then we work them up. That allows them to learn the institution, to understand the kind of unique policies and processes, as well as, frankly, it helps us to stay competitive, where our salaries tend to be more competitive with the marketplace for that entry-level job, and then less so as you move up. And what we have found in the past is that once people work for the university, they tend to want to stay with the university more so than trying to bring somebody in from the outside to, frankly, take a pay cut. That's always a little bit more challenging. Unfortunately for us, it has the amount of work that we have that can really be handled by those straight out of college individuals has reduced. The kind of bread and butter, transactional type audit work is more and more of that gets automated by systems, key controls, or we are able to handle it by data analytics. There's less work in that space, so that creates less pathways for us. So that's a challenge that we're continuing to try to work through, and it's not unique to us. When I talk to my peers throughout the Big Ten, for example, they're all struggling with similar things, many of which have just gone to not hiring anyone who doesn't have a few years of experience, which is, again, difficult for us to stay competitive. So these are challenges, Regent Verhalen, but areas which we're fortunate that at least in the leadership team, we have that knowledge, we have that background, so we can make sure that our audit work continues to inform and connect the dots for the administration and the regions, and we're working to build up that bench strength essentially throughout the institution or throughout the department.
Regent Verhalen?
No, other than if anyone's watching and is wondering what they should be when they grow up.
Yes, that'd be great.
No, it's a great question. You can tell me if this is a dumb idea. I'm known to have a number of those, but obviously you want the majority of your team to have that deep audit experience, and all but 3 are credentialed. But seeing as the institutional knowledge is really important in a place like this, is it possible to maybe recruit someone within the institution who has a finance background, maybe not an audit one, and bring them in and do maybe some of that training or credentialing? Is that possible, or one of those Kenyanya bad ideas?
No, Chair Kenyanya, it's a good idea, and it's something that we have done often throughout the institution or throughout the years. So we have a number of people on our department who we have brought in from other roles. One individual who actually left our department, went elsewhere within the institution and came back after 19 years. He's actually here today. And so this is something that we look to do to be able to pull in some of that institutional knowledge and make sure that we have that sort of expertise. There is always a question within the profession: is it easier to teach, a technology or a financial professional audit, or is it easier to teach an auditor to do some of the specifics related to the technology and finance, et cetera? There's always a debate. I think a healthy mix is good, and when we are recruiting, we don't want to create problems for other folks throughout the institution, but we do think about who are some people that we've seen recently that do have kind of a compliance mindset or do seem like that they would be good members of our team. And over the last year, I'm trying to think of the number of hires that were internal, at least 2 had previous University of Minnesota experience. So it absolutely is an area that we look to do that.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, I think Vice Presidents Volna and Townsend frowned when I talked about recruiting internally. Yeah. Any other questions from the committee? Yes, Regent Gully.
Chair Kenyanya, thank you. And thank you. I was wondering, so this is a question from someone who is only in their second audit and compliance meeting. So I was thinking about the audits that you do on public safety. Do you feel confident that you come back with recommendations that get implemented and that are sort of paint a broad picture of how we can improve public safety on campus? Or do you feel like it's more, and again, I'm sort of asking this because I haven't read a lot of the audit reports. Do you feel like it's more targeted at specific things that are happening on campus right now? Or do you think that you're able to sort of pick up on broad themes of here are some real ways that we could make improvements on public safety on campus?
Chief Auditor.
Yeah, thank you, Regent Gully, Chair Kenyanya. So whenever we conduct an audit, we start by thinking again about what are all the various risks that this particular unit or process has, and what can we do in order to be able to provide some assurance that there's controls in place to address those risks. So when we approach public safety, it's no different than how we'd approach any other audit, where we begin by thinking about what are those risks. To your question of whether we are able to confirm whether those changes are implemented, going back to our follow-up process, whenever we see an essential level of risk, we would go through and make sure that those risks are remediated. So for example, we've had concerns before when we've done audits of police department, both the Duluth Police Department as well as UMPD. If we've identified some concerns in the past related to management of inventory related to weapons, for example, or some of the security controls related to evidence, et cetera, and how are we managing those? And we look to make sure that those processes are formalized and are updated and improved. When we get to the question of effectiveness, is public safety, are we being effective in providing, public safety resources to the community, et cetera? Internal audit doesn't really get into what I would think of as more of an evaluation type activity, where we say, what is it that you're trying to achieve? What is the logic model to achieve that? And are we implementing that? We look more instead at the more operational level controls and processes. So I would think more towards, so for example, with UMPD especially, I would look more to the work done by Cedric Alexander and his team when they came in and assessed the police department and thought about, do we have an overall effective process? Then I would look to internal audit for that sort of particular opinion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Any follow-up, Regent Gully? No. Okay. Committee members. I have a couple quick ones. Briefly, Chief Auditor, we had a conversation preparation for this about unit audits versus process audits, and you touched on that a little bit, but can you share with the committee particularly how you see that changing, especially with peak and whatnot, and some of the efficiencies you kind of hope to get there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Kenyon. Yeah, so as you said, I mentioned this briefly, but I think that this, for us, selfishly, is one of the key things I'm hoping to get out of peak, which is, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we don't have enough audit resources to cover all of the institutional risks. We simply don't, and there's more demand for our audit work than we are able to do. And so when I think about peak and I think about the rationalization of how we get the administrative work done throughout the institution, I'm hoping that what we can derive from that is some key places where this is happening, where we say this one unit is managing it for better, maybe they're nailing it out of the park, or maybe there's particular areas for improvement. But by one unit managing something across the institution, we can go and look at that, provide or conduct a sample of various transactions, and we can get coverage throughout the institution for that particular risk, versus waiting sometimes several years before we might get to, especially some of the smaller colleges or places where they might be trying to manage that administrative risk internally. So I think that that's something that will likely start to frame those as process audits, where we'll look at how those operational centers are managing those risks for the entire institution, instead of waiting until we hit them within the individual colleges and units. I think that's already been occurring. You see that in some places, for example, like information technology, where for years we would spend time related to workstation management controls. Making sure, okay, are your devices encrypted, and are you making sure that you have password lockouts, et cetera. And we do that in every unit that we would go to. We'd have to spend a significant amount of time. I personally spent a significant amount of time doing that. And over the years, Bernie Glotchek and his team have really moved to make that workstation management more of a central service that is provided throughout the institution, as well as on the other campuses, other groups such as UMD, ITSS, et cetera, so that we can look at that in one place. And so we were able to provide, we have done audit work in both of those areas in the last couple of years, where we could say, let's try to fix this once centrally so we can have assurance that that we're covering those workstation risks throughout the institution instead of just when we're in that particular unit. So I could see more and more of those types of control processes happening in the future. Does that answer your question,
Yeah,
Chair Kenyanya?
absolutely. And thank you. One last question on institutional risk. You know, I like, it's on 57 here, yeah, so that's the profile, and I like that, actually on the next slide, how we're tying, thank you, how we're tying the audits, you know, to the risk profile. And we've been talking about the risk profile, we've talked about ERM as well. I think you mentioned that this fall we'd expect a updated one. I would just, and you know, this will probably be part of work planning and whatnot, but an opportunity for the committee to spend a little more time giving input before that final, because I think we've discussed it, but the committee hasn't really sat and said, this is what we see as higher or lower, but just, that was more of a comment than a question.
If I may,
Yeah.
Chair Kenyanya, briefly to comment on that, I absolutely agree that ultimately the institutional risk profile has to reflect the risks as both the senior leadership team as well as the Board of Regents sees it for the institution in order for it to be effective. Exactly how that process will look and how it will be communicated, discussed, and refined, I think that's some of the work that Baker Tilly is working with our University Health and Safety and Risk Group, Catherine, Associate Vice President Catherine Bonison, and her team to establish. But however that is established, that is a key outcome that I believe has to come out of that. And then to your point, we are then able to, we and other units throughout the institution are able to think about the work that we do and how is it tied to those risks as defined by the senior leadership and Board of Regents to make sure that we are in alignment. And so I think it's key that we make sure that everybody's on the same page with that.
Yeah, and just obviously recognize that's an administrative function, right, and something they're driving. So I'm not saying the board would define it, but I'd like the board's input to be, to be an input to that final product. So I appreciate that. Regent Turner.
Kenyanya, the slide right before this, I have a question.
Yeah.
All right, so Chief Auditor, the very last item, does that mean that that is no longer an issue? That all the processes have been put into place, et cetera? Or we don't worry about that anymore?
Regent Turner, Chair Kenyanya. No, so what this slide is depicting is our audit coverage of those particular risks. So these are inherent risks that the institution has, and maybe I should have emphasized that. When we think about risk, we think about it in terms of inherent risk, and then you have controls, and then you have the remaining what we would think of as residual risk. Here, this is the inherent risk. So this institutional risk profile is not stating that we're doing a terrible job at managing clinical partnerships or whatever it might be. It's just that there's a high level of inherent risk no matter what controls we had in place. That would be the case, that this is going to be a high risk area. So similar for sexual misconduct prevention training and response, that continues to be a high level of inherent risk. What I'm showing here is that we just don't think that any of our audits are providing audit coverage this particular fiscal year related to that particular risk, while we did in FY 2022.
Regent Turner, does that answer the question?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chief Auditor. We will move to the last agenda item, information items. Chief Auditor.
Thanks, Chair Kenyanya. So there's one information item in your document material, and this is the annual report on institutional risk and financial reports. This is a new report. It's actually a combination of two former reports, the semi-annual controller's report and the annual insurance and risk management report. This report is, going back to the conversation related to ERM, is being framed as part of the larger ERM effort, with focus on what the institution is doing related to financial controls and processes to address those types of risks, as well as how we're leveraging insurance to mitigate risks or to mitigate any negative outcomes. So this report is really being framed as part of that broader kind of ERM look for the institution. Something I could see happening in the future as a side commentary is that as the ERM process matures, we may have similar types of reports for some of the other key areas where we could say, this is what we're doing related to health and safety, this is what the institution is doing related to information technology, et cetera, to give the committee a broader picture of how we're managing risk throughout the institution. But for now, it's really that financial risk and the leveraging of insurance to mitigate risk.
Any questions regarding the information item? All right, seeing no questions, that is our last agenda item, and there's no additional business before the committee. I would remind members to be back by 9:15 for the commencement of the Finance and Operations Committee. Thank you, everyone, and we stand adjourned.